What you manifest in your mind, you can bring to reality.
Happy New Year! The first day of 2020 is upon us, and I am going to recap my last decade, starting with the end of 2009 is when December 15th, which is my birthday, I released the very first episode of the Inspired Disorder podcast. And that podcast played a huge role in my decade. A lot of things changed in my life in this past decade. In 2009, let me just say what my life was like in 2009. 2009 started the Inspired Disorder podcast, right? With Derek Helmer and Justin King about tech and geek stuff. And then I was living in a condo. I bought my first condo like the year before. I closed, I think the beginning of 2009 is when I moved in. So I was living in a condo. I was working full-time at Costco. And I was in a relationship, right? All three things that no longer exist in my life. But so I started the podcast. Eventually, like a couple years in or a year in, I broke my hand. I was very angry. I'd been punching walls and things like that just to kind of release my anger, mostly because I was angry with where I was working. I hated Costco, specifically management at Costco. They made working there a complete. It was horrible. Imagine going into your job that you've been doing for a decade, going into your job and people, these managers that literally do nothing. They sit around and just tell people to do shit and they don't do anything themselves. Imagine going to your job and every time, even sometimes before you even clock in, they tell you to go do somebody else's job. Right? I was doing sales. I was probably the most experienced person in that department, especially towards the end. And they would have me doing things. They would show me less respect than seasonal employees. Let's put it that way. Towards the end, and I pieced out, said, fuck you. But anyway, I broke my hand. I was angry. I actually just got back from watching, this was when Conan O'Brien was doing his tour after getting screwed over for The Tonight Show. And he was doing a show in San Diego. I was living in San Diego also at this time. And got wasted at the show. With my girlfriend and her sister, and my girlfriend didn't want to stay over. She had to go take care of her sister's dog, which that played a huge theme in that relationship where that dog was like an asshole, and my girlfriend cared more about the asshole than she did about me. That's how I would break it down. So I was angry that like her sister fucks off and she has to go now take care of her sister's dog. So, I was just, and whatever. I got mad. I punched a cement wall and broke my hand. After that, I realized that I should probably get into meditation. So that's when I started doing meditation. I've been doing meditation for this past decade. Eventually, I took a break from the podcast. When the podcast came back, it was just me and Justin. And at that point, Joe Rogan had been doing his podcast and Kevin Smith, and I kind of modeled IDP after that, just Justin and I having fun conversations. Pretty soon after that, we exploded within the Joe Rogan comedy. His fans and things, they all kind of got to know who I was and who Justin was, who our show was, and I would be waking up every day. This is back in Follow Friday. I'd have hundreds of Follow Friday requests. It was insane. It was an insane time. I wasn't prepared. I wasn't ready. Like now, if that were to happen, I'd be set. But back then, I didn't know. But what I did do was parlay that into starting a collective of podcasts, the Inspired Disorder Collective. We had, at one point, 20 shows from all the English-speaking countries over the world, continents, I should say. And it was an amazing time. I got to go see a bunch of stand-up comedy live. My first show was Ari Shaffir on 420. And then I went to see a bunch of Death Squad shows, got to see the End of the World show with Joey Diaz and Joe Rogan and Doug Stanhope and the Honey Honey Band. I got to go to the Death Squad studios at the Ice House a couple times, got to actually go in and hang out, got to meet a bunch of comedians. It was amazing. It was an amazing time. And then I got dumped and I got depressed. and things happen. But when I got dumped, I decided I needed to make a change. I started doing the Ray at Night, which is a monthly art event on Ray Street in North Park, San Diego. So I did that for like a year. I did that, which was a learning experience, selling my artwork, selling wood prints, selling different things, seeing people's reaction to my work was amazing. But I was growing the podcast. I was trying to do more artwork, kind of doing the things that I'm doing now. But it was like kind of the first steps, kind of figuring out what I want to do. And I hated my job. I hated working at Costco. There was nothing there for me. Like friends were, they're very few and far between. A lot of people just started doing their own things. And I just started pulling away from everything in San Diego, and eventually decided to move. I wanted to pursue, just go full throttle with the podcast, and started planning a few years before I actually ended up selling the place. Started planning my exit strategy, which started off with just the idea of selling my place and buying something cheap in Detroit because of all of the things, after the economy crashed. In 2008, Detroit was kind of one of those places where you can get a house for dirt cheap. That later shifted to Ohio because a lot of podcasters that were part of the IDC were from Ohio. I knew a lot of people in Ohio. And there was a small window where I almost moved to Ohio, almost transferred actually to a Costco that was being built in Dayton, Ohio. Very glad I didn't do that. I probably would have killed myself by now. Because a lot of the people that I had met in Ohio turned out to be kind of assholes. Not all of them. There are definitely some good people in Ohio, but there's also some just trolling assholes. Just when the whole election happened and Trump started getting traction, you started seeing assholes just like fucking go throw caution in the wind and just fucking be the asshole that they've always wanted to be. So I'm glad I didn't move there. Ended up moving to Denver with Keith, who had become the podcast co-host for the Inspired Disorder podcast during like the third version of the show. Justin eventually left, and Keith, who was just a fan of the show, started doing the show. And then we started getting a lot of guests, and I was like, let me just do, like, everything was growing. Literally, when I sold my place and I was living at a friend's house out in the desert, waiting for it to close and, then to move to Denver, like, numbers on the podcast were doubling every week. I'm like, perfect. I'm going to Denver. We're going to keep growing these podcasts. We're going to get sponsors. I'm going to be able to start doing more artwork again. And then I moved to Denver and everything crashed. That was when the elections happened, the primaries happened, and everybody became assholes. The IDC, there was like civil wars going on. The numbers crashed. Right when I moved to Denver, my entire plan of my life fell out from under me, and I spent 2 years in Denver meditating a lot, doing a lot of I love Denver, a lot of walking around. Keith and I mean, we still did the show. We were doing 2 episodes a week. Doing a bunch of segments. It was like focusing on just doing the podcast and growing the podcast production wise. It was amazing, despite the fact that our audience had left us. But I also started the Many Faces out in Denver, doing just kind of wanted to develop a style that fit me. I really enjoy painting fast and doing things, working with medium that's fast. And ink on paper was that perfect combination. So once I ran out of the money that I had made from selling my condo in Denver, I had only one place to go, where I'm living now. My best friend forever, Rochelle, offered me a space in her garage, which is kind of a converted office where I'm still living. And once I moved here, continued doing, it took me a while to figure out what I wanted to do with podcasting. But I just tried a few things and then started doing the Ray Taylor Show once IGTV got released. And I was like, I'm going to produce a show in the portrait format for IGTV, and then pump it out everywhere. So that's what I've been doing with the show. With the Many Faces, I continue doing that. I added video to the Many Faces, which was something new. So that's been going for 2 years now, and hit 1,000. I've just released my 1,000th painting recently. This show is close to 700 episodes, and I'm now back in the desert where I grew up. So at the beginning of the decade, San Diego, then for a couple years, Denver, and now I'm in Palm Springs area doing the Ray Taylor Show, the Many Faces, and Photoshops, which is kind of the trifecta of projects that it's really been a huge change in my life over the last 10 years. I'm broke as fuck, but I enjoy every bit of it, and really excited for when things catch again and the rubber hits the road again. But yeah, that's my decade in a nutshell. Spitfired out at you. Hope everybody is having a great new year. And yeah, go check out all my stuff. InspiredDisorder.com. Save 25% with coupon code RTS at Ray Taylor for me. Have a great day. Peace out.